Chapter 7. Rip paused at the end of the short hallway that led to the door he had entered from, and listened for footsteps. It was a real struggle, considering the level of noise from the arguing men farther in. Tuning them out took several seconds, as he fought to pinpoint a single possible noise. There was nothing there, or he was simply out of practice. It was a crapshoot, and the entire affair was making his head hurt. He hadn't done anything like this since he'd been rescued years before. Taking the chance, he held the dart gun at the ready, and peeked around the corner, ready to shoot if he was wrong. He wasn't, but the appearance of scrap-worthy carpet that started halfway down the hall didn't exactly make him feel better about it. The thin and holey material would serve to muffle the footsteps of anyone walking on it. Grumbling to himself, he crouched down low and forced himself to forget about the things he couldn't control. What he could do was to remain as out of sight as possible, and take them down as quickly and quietly as possible. That meant either staying low or going up high. He glanced up at the ceiling, and quickly dismissed that particular avenue of travel. The thin hanging ceiling boards that every office building he had ever been in would offer absolutely no support if a person tried to step on them. Shaking his head, he hurried to the end of the hallway and stopped just before the intersection. Taking a breath, he went to his knees and then to his stomach as he fell into the hallway junction. His head was turned to the left, and as soon as he registered that it was empty, he was already twisting around. His body hadn't even hit the ground, yet he was turning to look at the second side. There were 2 guards on that side, both slightly stunned at his appearance. One of them was clearly a local, while the other, from his gear, was a mercenary. Hitting the ground, Rip snapped the dart gun into position and pulled the trigger. The mercenary yanked the local in front of him as soon as he saw what Rip was going to do, and let him take the dart instead. Rip fired again, before the mercenary could open his mouth to yell or raise his gun. The dart took the local in the eye, popping it in a mass of bloody jelly. By then it was too late. He had given the second man too much time, and he had cried for help. With a snarl of annoyance, he fired another 2 shots from the dart gun at him. Both caught the man in his exposed cheek. Rip dropped the empty magazine, leaving one in the chamber, and slid in his last full dart magazine. Putting the safety on, he shoved it into his backpack and grabbed his knife. The time for using the dart gun had come to an end. Now that they knew there was an intruder, there was no real point in sneaking around any longer. That can of worms had been opened, and it couldn't be closed. He finished off both men with the knife and grabbed their weapons. There wasn't time to do a more thorough search of their persons, but at least he got some additional ammo and spare guns. The radio on his shirt started popping off as people called in, wanting to know what was going on, and the leaders fought for control. Well-trained this mercenary group was not, but he had already established that, and was very thankful for it. If they had been, then his chances of success would have gone downhill very quickly. With how out of practice he was, the lack of decent equipment, and the rookie mistakes he was constantly making against a proper mercenary outfit, he would have already been dead long ago. Luckily for him and Ashley, that wasn't who they were dealing with. These were third-rate pretenders, used to bullying people in third-world countries. They were out of their depth, even with an out-of-practice version of him. Slipping a spare pistol into the back of his pants, he hurried off, wanting to get some distance from the site of the yell. If possible, he wanted to take out some more people as they passed by wherever he chose to hide. He would need to find a decent spot before he could attempt something of that nature. He only made it to the end of the hallway before someone appeared at the opposite end and shot at him. The bullet punched through his backpack and into his back directly above his kidney and stole the air from his lungs. The impact sent him flying forward and into the wall in front of him. Rip groaned out a curse at Jesse as he spun around, and with only slightly shaky hands, aimed the suppressed pistol at the person who had shot him. He rapidly pulled the trigger 3 times. The first shot went wide, the second hit him in the chest, while the third destroyed the man's jaw. He got back to his feet with a grunt, and felt at the area of his back where he had been shot. The bulletproof shirt had done as advertised. The weave in that spot he thought now felt a little looser, but it was hard to say. Regardless, it had saved his life, while definitely making him feel most of the impact. Granted, it had still been spread out over a slighter, wider area, which meant he would have an even bigger bruise over the coming days, but it still hurt to get hit. His finger tugged at the fresh hole in the bag, and he felt the cool sensation of brass touch his fingertip. A chill ran through his veins. He would need to rethink where he stored his extra ammo if he was going to be getting shot in the back. The armored shirt might survive a few shots, but an entire backpack of ammo exploding right next to it was another thing entirely. Even if it did, the back of his head wouldn't. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to do anything with that, and wasn't about to leave the backpack behind. The idiot who had shot him had done it with a regular semi-auto unsuppressed rifle. If there had been any doubt that there was an intruder before, it was gone now. Rip put the suppressed pistol back into the holster on his thigh, and pulled the M&P 15 from his shoulder. The time for silence had vanished entirely, and there was no point in trying to keep up the illusion. From there on out, he was going to go full bore and get to Ashley as quickly as possible. He needed to rescue her before they could either move her or do something else to her in retaliation for what he was doing. He hesitated for a moment, trying to remember which side the bulk of the voices had been coming from. The man coming from behind him had made him doubt his original choice. Shaking his head, he pushed forward with the rifle held at the ready. There wasn't time for him to be doubting his choices, not when another 2 local hired guns were coming down his chosen hallway right at him. He squeezed off 2 shots, one for each, flinching as their own shots went wide, but unhappy that they had gotten them off at all. He needed to be faster. Rip fired another 2 shots, double-tapping each of them. He ran past them as they crumpled and recklessly went around the corner, a second before a local goon stepped out of a room to the side. He needed to remind himself to be more careful, even as he snapped the rifle into position and squeezed the trigger. He peeked into the room and saw a couple of adult magazines on a table to the side. It didn't take much to guess what this fellow had been doing in there alone. The numbers inside the building were quickly getting out of control. He had already taken out 5 of the mercenaries and 5 local thugs. Still, the voices he could hear hadn't dimmed in the slightest. Whatever he was walking into had even his long-dead sense of self-preservation starting to protest. Chapter 8. The plumber had told him this was a small operation, and if he had run into the original numbers that had been quoted, he would have believed that. Now, he was beginning to seriously doubt how up-to-date Jess's information had been. The man had missed locals getting hired, after all. They weren't necessarily part of his purview, but he should have noticed. He stormed through the next hallway and found the entrance to the conference room, where all the voices were coming from right in front of him. Rip kicked the door open and then dove to the side. He narrowly avoided the hail of bullets that erupted from inside the room. Through it all, the voices never so much as stuttered. A white dusting of plaster sprinkled down around him, along with chips of wood from the doorframe. Peeking around the corner, he confirmed what he had already guessed. They were listening in on a voice-over-IP VoIP call, nothing more. A projector hanging from the ceiling above the table showed the aliases and names of each person participating on a white screen attached to the wall, but no faces. Max, Ashley's father, was one of the members on the call. He needed to work faster, although he had a sneaking suspicion it wouldn't be quick enough. A quick glance inside the room was enough to tell him that Ashley wasn't inside. There were 2 mercenaries, along with a local who had been waiting for him. That meant that after he erased these 2 mercs from existence, there should only be another 3 he needed to worry about. Maybe 4, if there had already been one on the island before the boat arrived. He really didn't want to get bogged down in a gunfight here, though. He needed to find Ashley. There were only so many rooms she could be in, unless they had already moved her. Which was an option he refused to consider at the moment. If they had done that, then he might never find her again, not unless he had several of the mercenaries alive to question in any case. They always say torture doesn't work, and that's true if the patient victim doesn't know the answer. There is a science to it, and the first rule is they have to actually know the answer to whatever you are asking them. If they don't, then they'll simply make up whatever they can to get you to stop. It was easy with rabble like this, who would sell out their own mothers for $1. People who have a cause, such as zealots, they took true skill to break. They required a person to go to a dark place inside themselves with what they needed to do. Rip was glad he wouldn't need to awaken that side of himself. The person he had been at his absolute worst, when he was just trying to survive, still gave him the occasional nightmares. That wasn't a road he wanted to tread down again. He would do it to save Ashley, but it might not be one he could return from a second time. There was a lot of that going around at the moment, but it was especially true for if he decided to go down that route. Rip waited for them to run their magazines dry before tilting around the destroyed doorframe and taking quick aim at the closest one. It was the local, which he didn't need alive. He sent a skull-splattering round through his head and switched the muzzle to the next target. This one he did need alive, just in case. He dropped his aim and fired, taking out the man's kneecap. Rip followed that up with a second shot to the man's other knee as he fell. He wouldn't be going anywhere, anytime soon. The second mercenary had managed to reload by that point, and had his rifle pointed at Rip with wide, panicked eyes. "What do you want?" he asked shakily, his accent pointing to him as someone from Europe. "I want the girl." "Where is she?" Rip demanded, his voice cold and full of hate. "Not here. We knew this location was being watched by the locals. She was sent to a hotel on the other side of the island." "Which hotel?" he growled, rapidly losing patience with the man. "The same hotel she was originally staying at, just on the top floor. The penthouse." Rip squeezed the trigger, putting a bullet through him, and then another through the squealing man on the floor. "Next time stagger your reloads." He spat at their corpses in frustration. He had been so close to her and never even known it, all because of their games. Well, he hadn't even been armed back then, so it hadn't been a complete waste of time, just most of one. Rip did a quick search of the men for anything useful, and then went back into the hall after shutting off the sound system. He would quickly finish up here, and then he would head back to the hotel and get Ashley. The two mercenaries had been wearing handguns of the same caliber as his own. He stripped them of their spare magazines and went on his way. The new ammo wouldn't be subsonic, but you used what you could get. Inside the hotel, being quiet would be more important than it had been here. Once he was there, he would need to be more careful. Without the noise from the VoIP call echoing through the place, he was suddenly cognizant of how quiet it was. Silent enough that it was likely he was the only one there. Rip poked the barrel of his rifle into the hallway and then jerked it back. Nothing happened. There were no gunshots or noises from people moving around. It was silent. He had gotten lucky and managed to encounter the one person who was behind him early on. He quickly searched the building one more time, making sure to grab any extra ammo he could along the way. If there had been more time, he would have liked to set the building on fire or dump the bodies in the ocean. He settled for taking an extra minute to drag them into the dark alley and calling it good. He would call the plumber on the way back to the hotel and let him deal with the aftermath. Even if Jesse couldn't deal with it directly, he would be able to contact the local cleaner team for him and handle the arrangements. The cost would simply get added to his bill when all of this was done, less whatever they took for the guns and various bits of armor they found on the men. The last thing he needed to do in the taxi back was call Max and have him delay the deal for a little longer. That was not going to be a fun conversation. Chapter 9. The phone call with Max did not go well. He was understandably stressed, and didn't like that they were playing games in the first place when there should have been no reason to. It was supposed to be a simple kidnapping, but now they were both beginning to think that there was something more going on behind the scenes. The call to Jesse went far better, and he promised to send a cleaner team to the building as soon as they finished their call. Rip told him to also send the cleaners to the hotel when he was done. There was going to be a mess in the penthouse that would need to be cleaned up. By the time he had finished both conversations, the taxi driver was shaking and dripping with a cold sweat. Rip paid him no mind and instead checked his guns, slipping a few rounds into the magazines as needed. "We've AR arrived, sir," the taxi driver stuttered out as they pulled up to the hotel. Rip glared at the rifle strapped to his backpack in annoyance. It was so tall that it stuck out and drew attention to it. He had lost his jacket that he had been using to cover the rifle from view at some point earlier. "Give me your shirt and hat," he ordered the man, reaching for his wallet. The trembling man peeled off his sweat-soaked shirt and handed it to him without complaint. With the shirt draped over his bag and the hat sitting atop the barrel, the rifle was at least somewhat disguised. He only needed to pass a cursory inspection so he could get inside without causing a panic. Behind him, the taxi sped off, the driver well compensated for his stinky shirt and worn hat. Walking inside, Rip nodded to the lady at the front desk before stopping as a thought occurred to him. Is the night manager in? I need to ask them something? More specifically, he needed to take something from them. Penthouses almost always required a separate key to access than the rest of the floors. He needed to get his hands on that key before he tried to head on up. The front desk worker nodded and picked up her phone as she summoned the manager for him. I was told you needed me for something. The night manager was an overweight middle-aged woman with tired circles beneath her eyes. Rip saw the manager's card hanging from her neck and nodded to himself. Is a code needed to access the penthouse level, or just a key card? Just a key card is needed, she replied, the confusion evident in her voice. Good. I hoped that would be your answer. I'll need a key card for the penthouse floor then, if you please. I'm sorry, that isn't possible. We currently have some person. That's not what I was saying, but I think you know that. Rip reached around to his back and pulled out the tranquilizer gun. Don't worry, these will only put you to sleep. The people in the penthouse are not very nice, and they took someone very important to me. I'll be needing your keycard. He squeezed the trigger and sent a dart into the night manager's neck. The front desk operator barely had time to scream before a second dart puffed out the barrel and into her chest. Both fell to the ground within seconds, asleep. They would be out of it for the next few hours. He dragged both of their bodies into the manager's office at the back and swiped the keycard from her neck before making sure the door was closed behind him. Seconds later, he was inside the elevator and headed for the penthouse. Once he had had the keycard, it was simply a matter of swiping it to unlock the top floor and pressing the right button. With all of that done, he unstrapped the rifle from his bag and slung it from his shoulder where he could get to it quickly. Unholstering the suppressed pistol from his thigh, he pulled it out and checked to make sure a round was in the chamber. He was ready, or at least he hoped he was. The elevator dinged as it reached the top floor and the doors opened. Rip poked his head out looking for enemies. He quickly scurried out of the metal box when he didn't see anyone around. With the elevator's arrival ding, alerting all who had heard it to a possible intruder, he was on a clock again. He had badly underestimated how large the penthouse suite was. It took up the entire top floor of the hotel. Which he had known, but now that he was in the suite experiencing it, the information hit differently. It was like he was walking through a house instead of a simple hotel suite. The place had more room than the office building he had just come from. Holding his pistol at the ready, he slunk down the hallway from the elevator. He was expecting there to be at least another 3 mercenaries in this penthouse, but the possibility was there for more. He doubted that any locals would be here. Slinking down the hallway, he opened the door of each room he passed. There were 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a small gaming room, and some sort of playground room for kids. Each of them was empty. All he could do was keep walking until he reached the open living room space at the end. Multiple hallways extended out from that room, but he didn't need to go any farther than he already had. Waiting for him in the center of the room, sitting on an overstuffed chair, was Ashley. Her hands, legs, and fingers were all tied together. There was something stuffed inside her mouth, and her eyes were wide open and full of fear. Sprawled across the floor in front of her was something that he could only describe as once possibly being human. It also illustrated perfectly what these things, he hesitated to call anyone willing to do something like that, human, had meant when they said they would make her wish she had never been alive. Even at his worst, Rip had never imagined doing these sorts of things to a person. This went beyond torture and had crossed over into the realm of sick pleasure a few counties worth of lines back. They had carved into what he assumed had once been a woman and removed pieces of her, one section at a time. It was as though someone had wanted to improve on the old Chinese torture method, death by 1,000 cuts. Cauterized burn marks on each spot hinted at how they had kept her alive for so long. Regardless, at this point, the woman was nothing more than a mewling, stumpy mess on the ground. Rip felt a renewed sense of rage surge up inside of him. Both for the unknown woman, and because he had no doubt that they had made Ashley watch as they continued to work on her. Stepping into the room, Rip already had one of the two mercenaries in his sights. He calmly squeezed the trigger, sending the bullet into the man's skull. Switching targets, he sent 3 shots into the second man. The first 2 caught him in his bulletproof vest, while the third pulped his face. Walking over to the girl on the floor, Rip swallowed around the lump in his throat. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." With those parting words, he ended her suffering. A squeak from Ashley made him look up at her sadly. "I told you I was going to tell you the truth, and that it might change things between us. This is me, or at least what I was raised to be." He sighed and shook his head. "This still isn't the right time. There should be a couple more of them left." "Where are they?" He reached out and pulled the gag from her mouth. "Gone. As soon as Dad paid them, they left," she struggled to say from an exceedingly dry mouth. Chapter 10. Son of a, Rip cursed. He was supposed to wait. He carefully cut her free, his mind racing. What about these 2? Why were they left behind? They were supposed to bring me back down to our hotel room, and then clean up the mess here. Despite everything, they were going to uphold their end of the deal. She answered numbly, her mind having long since fallen into a state of shock. He wondered if they still would have upheld the deal, if he knew how many of their men he had killed. His current state of mind was good for him, as it meant fewer questions from her at the moment. However, it still worried him. She needed to be mentally awake to properly process all of this. Suppressing everything that had happened sounded nice in theory until it started to come back. Then it could easily send her into a spiral of self-destruction. "I'm sorry about this, but we don't have time to be delicate," Rip said before smacking her across the face. Ashley blinked, the fugue in her eyes clearing. "Rip, did you really just slap me?" she demanded in a cold tone, a hand on her red cheek. He hurried over to the first of the mercenary bodies and began stripping it of everything useful. "I did. It was the fastest way to shock your mind back to normal, at least for a while. I know this entire experience is unpleasant at best, but we can't have you suppressing it. You need to be aware of all of this to process it naturally. Sorry." This time he also took the man's bulletproof vest along with his weapon and ammo, before moving on to the second man. As soon as they met up with Jesse again, he would need to return his current bulletproof shirt. Ashley looked to be raring up for the mother of all screaming matches when he pulled out his phone and dialed the plumber. "Hey Jesse, I've got her back. It went off without a problem this time, mostly. The penthouse is definitely going to need the cleaner. These mercenaries. I have to tell you, they had some really sick hobbies. It's not pretty. Also, 2 of them are still in the wind. It looks like the leader and whoever is directly beneath him both left for the boat as soon as they were paid." Jesse cursed in the background and began ordering people around before bringing the phone back to his mouth. "Do you have my money to complete our deal?" Yeah, I haven't checked, but it should be in my account by now," he replied, more than a little confused at the sudden change in the conversation's direction. Beside him, Ashley was doing her best to not look at the bodies, while also holding on to her anger at him. "Good, get your bags. I'll be at your hotel in just a couple of minutes. We're still getting you on your boat, but with a slight change of plans." With that, he hung up. Rip looked at his phone and then at Ashley. "Oh, we need to get our bags from the front desk downstairs. I'm not entirely sure how though, they're kind of asleep at the moment. I had to trank them to get the keycard for this floor." She took a deep breath, her fingers forming claws as she fought for control. "Rip, we are going to have a very long and very open conversation when this is all over. Frankly, I think I have been very good about all of this so far." A slight tremble crept into her voice at the end. "But this is all becoming a little much. Now let's just go down there and see what we can find." "Okay." Rip nodded in acknowledgement of her words and gently pushed her around the woman's body and toward the elevator. The things they did to her, her fingers dug into his arm. What I saw them do. Why wouldn't they just let her die? Rip pulled her in close, burying her head against his chest. "I don't know, Ashley. I really don't. But you can't think about that right now. We can't afford to have you losing your cool just yet. I'm sorry. I know that isn't fair to you and it goes against what I said a few minutes ago. I need you to just hold it together until we get in the car." He held her close and stroked her back as they waited for the elevator to arrive. "Rip, who are you?" she asked softly as tears began to soak his shirt. He had known this conversation was coming, and yet it still scared him in the way only things pertaining to Ashley could. "Where do you want me to start?" he asked somberly, tightening his grip protectively around her as the elevator doors dinged open. "At the beginning. Tell me who you are, the truth about your scars, and how you know the things that you obviously know about all of this. I want to know how you became like this." Rip walked them onto the elevator and pushed the button for the bottom floor. "That's a lot to unpack, and requires far more time than what we have at the moment. But I'll give you the highlights edition. I was 5 years old when my life changed, and not for the better." He swallowed and licked his lips. It had been a while since he thought about this particular set of events. "My parents were professors. My dad studied history, and my mom archaeology. They were a match made in heaven, in that everything interested them, but in different ways. There was no conflict of interests or trying to assert dominance, at least not that I can remember." "What happened?" "We went to Turkey. I don't remember if it was for a dig or something else. All that matters is an uprising happened while we were there. A bomb took out the building they were in at the time, and in the confusion, some men took the opportunity to grab all the kids who had been wandering the street playing or had come out to escape the blast, which just so happened to include me. They stuffed us in cages and took us across the border to Syria and forced us to become child soldiers." She gasped and pulled back. "Your scars?" "Yeah, like I said at dinner, the truth is much worse than the story I had been telling you. These aren't the first people I have killed, not by a long shot." "When were you rescued, or did you escape?" she asked as the elevator doors opened, still holding herself a little back from him. He led her to a storage room, off to the side of the reception desk, where he had seen them put other bags earlier. "Rescued, and a few years ago," he replied softly, a little unwilling to tell her how long he had been with those people. Passed from one group to another, as more powerful groups absorbed the weaker ones. It had been an endless cycle, each time losing a little more of himself against the struggle to simply survive. Her hand squeezed his as she urged him to look at her. Gazing into her eyes, he was able to see that the panic from before had receded and been replaced with care for him. His story was helping her to refocus on other things than everything she had just seen and experienced. For the moment at least, his past was helping her to ignore what had just happened. "Fine, I'll tell you a little more. Help me find our bags." Rip rolled his neck to crack it and breathed out in exasperation. "I was 13 when the military finally took down the group I was a part of. As soon as they attacked, I turned on the group and helped take them all down. Some of the military guys saw what I had done and gave me the chance to explain. Even then, I barely managed to convince them to give me a chance to prove that I was a kidnapping victim before they tried to shoot. It was a very stressful time. They held me in isolation for over 3 weeks over there while they checked out my story. I was then passed along to the embassy, at which point it took another year before I was allowed to return home. Only to find that everything that belonged to my parents had long since been sold off, and any money there had once been had been taken by my aunts and uncles. Family that wanted nothing to do with me after what I had been through. I got some of it back with the government's help, but it wasn't much. I wasn't even 15 yet, in a country I no longer understood and with no real money to speak of." "I assumed that is where Nathan came into the picture?" Ashley asked with an angry grunt as she pulled out their suitcases from behind a few others. He nodded. "Whoever was handling my case decided that social services wasn't equipped to handle a former child soldier. However, there also weren't a lot of options at the time either. Nathan was," he shook his head as they walked through the foyer. "Well, you've met him. The guy was impressive. He used to be an operative or diplomat of some sort, who worked for one of the 3-letter agencies. I don't know, something like that. Why he agreed to watch over someone like me, I'll never know, but he got me straightened out and helped me to readjust to being a civilian again." The SUV with Jesse inside squealed to a stop in front of the hotel just then, preventing them from pursuing the subject any further. They hurriedly dragged their suitcases out behind them. "Thank you for telling me all of this, and for keeping me distracted." Ashley kissed his cheek as the plumber climbed out of his car. Despite himself, Rip felt as though a chasm had opened up between them.